A family member asked me to look at their leaf blower, and I hate to say it, but this one is fighting back quite a bit, and I'm having to go a little bit further than I really want to try to figure out what's wrong with it. I will say one thing about this leaf blower: the issue it's having seems to happen to a lot of them, and it might be something you're experiencing with yours, and if you are, well, I feel really bad for you. In today's video, we finished repairing this Poulan Pro leaf blower, and I can't wait to see if I was right about it. In the last video on this blower, we found out that it had fuel, spark, and compression, but it still wouldn't start. Now, after confirming that the ignition timing was correct, there was only one option left, which was to take the engine apart so we can inspect the piston ring. Now, I'm going to try and repair this blower. However, it may not be the exact repair you need to make to yours. We'll explore other options later in the video. Now, we're only going to mention what these other options could be. We don't have enough time to look into them, but if you need more information on these options, you're welcome to ask as many questions as you need to. If you didn't see the first part of this video, there should be a link at the top of the screen that will catch you up on how we got to this point in the repair. So the last time we saw this blower, I had just removed the piston and found the ring to be stuck to it. Now with the ring stuck to it, the engine won't make as much compression as it's supposed to, which is the reason I think why it wouldn't start. Now, from the comments I've gotten from the shorts video, some people have stated that a range of 90 to 120 psi is the minimal pressure rating required to start a two-cycle engine, and I hate to say it, but the safest answer to that would be as much as possible. The more pressure the engine can make, the better. So when I did the compression test for this engine, I was only able to get 80 psi, which I thought was more than enough, but I'm hoping to prove myself wrong. After getting the piston out and freeing the stuck ring, I then cleaned the ring landing and also cleaned the carbon off the piston. There was also a small amount of carbon on the ring, so I cleaned that off as well. Now when installing the ring, it can only go on one way, but I'd still be careful doing it. So the bigger question is, how does the ring get this sort of buildup causing the ring to get stuck? And the short answer would be the two-cycle oil being used with the fuel, the oil mixture, and how you use your blower. If you use a poor quality oil or one that's not designed for use in two-stroke engines, it could cause excessive carbon buildup. The concentration of oil in the fuel would also have a huge impact on carbon buildup as well. If you recall, the fuel I took out of it was a bit heavy in oil, and if I had to guess, I'd say it was around 32 to 1 or more. Also, if you use your blower mainly at idle or at part throttle, that would also lead to excessive carbon buildup. After getting the piston back into the cylinder, I'll then slide the connecting rod onto the crank journal and carefully mate the cylinder to the block. After that, I'll then reverse the disassembly process and get the engine back to a point where I can at least do a compression test. If I really wanted to, I could probably perform the test sooner than later, but I'd like to get the majority of the blower back together first. Now, I got a lot of great comments on what to do if this repair doesn't get the engine to start, and the best option was to replace the ignition module. They felt the ignition system was delivering either a weak spark or that it was sporadic at best. The problem is that this would have been a great time to have replaced it because getting back to this point takes quite a bit of work. So how is the ring supposed to move if it's not stuck? Well, if you take a look at the ring now, and if I rotate the engine back and forth, you should be able to see the ring move inside the ring landing. Since it's moving a bit, it means the ring is not stuck anymore. When we first saw it, the ring was not acting this way at all. It would move with the piston, which means it was stuck to it. Another option as to why the engine might not be starting is that the air gap between the magnets on the flywheel and the ignition coil was either too small or too large. To reset the gap, I'm going to use a standard business card. I'll just place the card between them and let the magnets pull the coil to it, and then tighten down the bolts. I don't think the gap was that far off, but I did want to show you how to reset the gap just in case. Also, don't forget to rotate the engine just to make sure it's not hitting anything. Once I know the engine can make a full rotation, I'll then replace the rear housing back onto the engine. This would be a good time to replace the pull rope or even service the recoil assembly. However, this one is working just like it's supposed to. Now once the bolts are tight, I'll then start to put the parts back onto the blower. This will be a great time to remind you to either take notes on how stuff came off, that way you can put it back on correctly. Believe me, I've messed up before with some terrible consequences. I find that filming the disassembly to be a much better option, and the only recommendation would be to make sure there's plenty of lighting. After you tighten the nut for the impeller, be sure to give it another spin just to make sure it's not stuck. This will keep you from having to take the blower apart again if there is a problem. Since the recoil is back on the engine, that means I can pull the engine over and perform another compression test. Just as a reminder, the last reading was a meager 80 psi, so I'm hoping that after freeing the piston ring to get a much better reading. So the new reading is now 130 psi, which is more than a 50% increase in compression. Now that's the sort of reading I would expect from a blower that's only a few years old, just like this one. At this point, I'm willing to say that with this impressive increase in compression, the engine should definitely start. The worst part is that if it doesn't start, I'll have to tear this blower apart to replace the ignition coil. To be honest, the coil is only $14, so I probably should have done it anyway. I guess we'll find out here in a couple of minutes. Oh, there's one more thing I want to do just for a bit of insurance, and I don't think most of you are going to approve of it. Since I'm not 100% sure if the spark arrestor screen is clean of carbon, I'm going to drill a small hole into the muffler next to the outlet. This should help out if the screen is clogged in an area where I can't see it. But to be honest, what I should have done was to put the muffler into a fire and burn the carbon off that way. This way works too, but it might make the engine just a little bit louder. Now, some have recommended that I also replace the carb, and even though it would be a great idea, I think it'd be a bit premature, and the reason is because we haven't diagnosed it to have a running issue yet, only a starting issue. That's after we physically put fuel into the engine, which of course bypasses the carb, and if we had replaced the ignition coil and the carb without any evidence that there were even a problem, we'd be over $30 in parts on a blower that's probably only worth about $50 on a good day in November. Besides, I know the blower was working just fine the day before it stopped working, so I'm pretty certain the carb wasn't the issue, but then again, I wasn't there to see how it was running, so you never know. I only have the word of the person who was using it, and that's why I find it better not to have any information about it, only because it can get in the way of diagnosing it. Now, the blower isn't going to lie to me, but the person using it could be. Now, if you look back at my library of videos on both of my channels, I think I've done the same fix on 2 other blowers. One was the same brand and the other was a Craftsman. Now, 2 out of 10 blowers is nowhere near a majority, but the fact is I don't think I've had to do this sort of repair on any other style of blower, no matter what brand, or if it's a handheld or a backpack style. It's just the idea that I think I've had to do this repair 3 times in the past couple of years, so to me, that's way more than it should be. To be honest, these are really good blowers, and if you bought one of these new and used a really good canned fuel, I don't think the problem of the ring getting stuck would even be an issue. I think the same can be said if you used good ethanol-free gasoline and a really good 2-stroke oil from a great company. The strange thing is that I use a cheap 2-stroke oil with ethanol-free gasoline, and I've never had this problem happen to me on one of these Poulan blowers in the last 3 seasons I've used it. There is one other issue with this particular blower, and it's the cylinder bolts backing out of the engine and causing a massive air leak, which pretty much turns this blower into a brick. I think I've seen this twice before, once recently and the other one years ago, so there may be a design flaw with these blowers. Otherwise, someone at the factory just forgot to put thread locker on the bolts. The one thing that it could never be is planned obsolescence. These large companies would never have something last only 1 to 2 years, that way you'd have to buy a new one. They'd just never be that greedy. So when pressing the purge bulb, fuel should come up the fuel filter line and into the carb. It will then fill the bulb and then leave the carb and go back to the tank through the return line. As you can see, the fuel is flowing through the lines just like it's supposed to. If you don't see any fuel in the bulb or the bulb is hard to push, there could be an issue with the carb, and I would consider definitely replacing it. It also seems that whoever was using this blower before thought it should only run at 1 speed, which was wide open throttle, because they had the idle set screw all the way in. I'll just back it out a little bit so it'll idle for once. Now with the spark plug wire connected, I think it's finally time to see if tearing the engine to pieces was worth the time. Well, it seems the stuck piston ring was the reason the engine wouldn't start, and I'm glad it did because I was running out of ideas on how to fix this blower. I think the answer is pretty simple. The compression is important for the engine to start, but if the piston ring isn't sealing well, it's going to have a difficult time drawing in enough air and fuel to get it started. At least that's the theory I'm coming up with, and to me it's quite believable. So in the end, I'm still at a loss as to how it could run one day and lose enough compression overnight for it to not start. I think the theory is sound about the engine not drawing in enough air and fuel for it to start, but how quickly it happened doesn't make any sense to me. Either way, it's working now, and hopefully you won't be seeing this blower anytime soon again. So my question is, does my theory about the engine not starting because it wasn't able to breathe in enough air and fuel because of the stuck ring sound believable to you, or do you have another idea as to what happened to this engine? Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions about this project or your own projects, and I hope to see you in the next video.